This program has received funding from Utah Humanities and Utah Historical Society.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Loren Webb with the Washington County Historical Society. We would like to welcome to you to our, this is our 11th oral history interview today with Santa Clara-Ivins Police Chief Bob Flowers. It is Wednesday, January 24th, 2024. Let me start out by asking, what is your full name?
Robert Flowers.
Okay. And how did you get interested in law enforcement?
Well, you got to go back. When in my youth, I had a friend of mine whose father was a Riverside County sheriff's deputy. He was a wonderful guy, and a lot of pride in what he did. And I'd go to his house and I'd see the car and I'd hear the stories, and that kind of piqued my interest. And then through my youth, I had a few jobs where I interacted with some law enforcement. And then I watched, when I was in high school, I always thought it was a positive thing. I never really had a negative experience. Then went into the military, and I worked really closely with the DEA. And at that time I was stationed in Miami. We worked closely with the Miami Police Department. It just seemed like a really cool gig. And then when I got out of the military...
And the DEA was Drug Enforcement Administration.
Working the drug issues in South Miami, long time ago.
So was that your first job? Did you
Well,
work with...
I was in the military, and we worked closely. We worked with, you had a lot of drug running up and down the Florida coast, and part of the Coast Guard mission was to intercept those. And I was a crew member on one of the boats for a short time. And then I worked a couple other roles in the military, and it seemed fun. For a young guy, it's a lot of fun.
Yeah.
It's a lot of fun.
And which branch of the military are we speaking?
The Coast Guard.
Oh, the Coast Guard.
I was in the Coast Guard, yeah.
Oh, wow.
Went down to join the Marines, and the recruiter wasn't there, and I wound up in the Coast Guard. Been grateful for that ever since.
Oh, my gosh.
But,
okay, so what was where and when did you first apply for a job in law enforcement?
Well, I was a student. I gotten out of the military and went up to Brigham Young University to go to school. And like most students, were poor, and I had a young family. And I just looked at a newspaper one day where a police department was hiring, and they were looking for veterans. And I thought, well, I can solve two purposes. I can feed my family and get a job. And so I went down there and applied, and wound up as a police officer. Loved it.
Which department?
It was with the Tooele City Police Department.
Tooele City Police Department.
Yeah,
oh,
I started
great.
there.
Okay.
And I was with them about a year, and then I went into the Utah Highway Patrol and worked for the Highway Patrol.
Where?
In Tooele County in Salt Lake.
Okay. So were you working a lot of I-80?
I-80 at the time.
Okay.
And a lot of the state routes. And then I left for a short time and went back to Southern California, where I was from, and worked for the Highway Patrol.
California Highway Patrol.
California Highway Patrol.
Where?
In LA.
Okay.
Worked LA, and I was down there for a number of years. And then I wanted to come back and go to school. And so I was going to go a different career path. So I came back to Utah, went back to the Utah Highway Patrol, was transferred to the University of Utah, graduated, and then my career just kind of took off from there. And
What was your degree in?
I have a political science degree.
Okay.
And I had envisions I was going to go off to law school. It's a lot more expensive, and you have to do better on the LSAT than I did. I recognize that. And so I stayed in law enforcement, promoted, came to Southern Utah, worked down here for a number of years.
Doing what?
Working as the section commander down here with the patrol where I ran.
With the Utah Highway Patrol?
With the Utah Highway Patrol.
So where were you based out of at that time?
Right here, right out of St. George.
But where in St. George? Were you in the basement of the Washington County
We were in a couple
court?
Yes, I'm sorry.
The court building?
We were at the port of entry, and then we went up to the Sheriff's Department.
The Sheriff's Department.
Worked out of the Sheriff's Department.
Okay.
And I did that. We worked at drug interdiction, whatever the Highway Patrol mission was down in 4 counties. And then St. George City had an opening for a police chief. I applied and was in St. George City for 3.5 years, I believe.
Okay. So when you came to the police department, and how did the chief of police position, how did that come about?
That was kind of an interesting thing. It was a little bit controversial for me in the fact that I was coming from the state, working mainly Highway Patrol, and applying for St. George at that time. As it is now, it was a major Utah city, right? And I applied. It was a very, very, very tough process. kind of a little history there. I wasn't the first choice. They offered it to another individual, and he came down, decided he would stay at the police department where he was a police chief at. They called me and asked me if I wanted to be re-interviewed. And I said, no, if I'm truly not number two, I think I'll move on and stay where I'm at, because I was happy with what I was doing. And Mayor MacArthur at the time gave me a call and said, we've talked.
Dan MacArthur.
Dan MacArthur. We talked to Gary Esplin and the other city council members. We think you'd be a good candidate.
Okay.
And so I wound up here.
Okay, so describe your job as police chief at the St. George Police Department, and how did that job change or expand during your tenure there?
The St. George City at the time, if I remember correctly, the population was about 60,000 people. And it was going through some changes. We had a growing recreational aspect to the city. We also had, folks may not remember this, but we had a pretty serious methamphetamine problem. And we had some major things coming our way. We had apartment complexes growing. And I felt like we needed to maybe not look at ourselves as a reactionary law enforcement where we would get a call, we'd respond, we'd take it to detectives. We had to look a little deeper into the community. So we set about changing some things. We looked at, we were the original founders of the Washington County Drug Task Force. At that time, we were able to get something that was really positive for us. We were able to get the DEA involved with us. We were having some successes. We started the bicycle squad for our parks and our pathways. Folks were a little concerned about walking the paths and the safety aspect of it. Your paths are no good if people do not feel safe on them, right?
Right.
And we know, so we had a little bit of a traffic issue. We started the motorcycle squad. St. George City has very smart people working for them when I got there. I mean, I'm not going to take credit for all that. They had some great ideas as far as teaming up with the university and student housing, looking at some of our apartment complexes, what we were going to do there. One of the problems that St. George City had at the time, we had a lot of absentee owners of our apartment complexes. And when you're absentee, you're not there every day, things can go down pretty quickly. And it doesn't take long to lose control. I remember kind of a funny story. We were talking about one of our parks. Some of the citizens were complaining that the park was unsafe. So we took the staff down there and we're at this park and we're thinking, okay, what's going on here? The park was in it wasn't very well taken care of.
Are you talking about Worthen Park?
Yes.
Okay.
There were some problems in Worthen Park, and I had talked with the city manager about it and others, and we were talking about in the police department, we just don't have the guys to come through here every hour. But while we were standing there, we watched something happen. We watched some guys come around a corner, took a beer bottle, smashed it against the bathroom wall. We looked over and saw a mother with her children. She gathered them up and left. And I said, how in the world can we allow this? So it's kind of a great example of what you can do in a community when you work with your parks, your citizens, your police department. And it was kind of a tone that we used throughout some of the other aspects of the city. We realized you do have to make the sacrifices. You do have to get into your parks. People want to come to the parks. They want to be safe and they need to be well maintained. But that can go into apartment complexes. It can go into we wanted another thing, we wanted people to feel safe when they walked in the parking lots of our malls, right? And at Christmas time, we used to get a lot of auto burglaries. And Gordon McCracken, he used to work for the city at the time, came up with the idea of why don't we put guys on bicycles in the parking lots? And we went from having dozens of auto burglaries to having 0 in one Christmas season.
Wow.
So it tells you something, right?
Yeah.
And so we took that, had a powerful effect on us, and I believe that we live in a great community because of our history and the things that we've done. And safe communities just don't happen overnight, right? You've got to kind of grow them and maintain them. And
right.
It's like a garden. You've got to pay it a lot of attention.
Right. Were there any other challenges that you faced as police chief, and how did you deal with them?
Well, we had a problem, of course, with drugs. And it's a problem that your children, your grandchildren, their children are going to deal with. We are a country that loves our drugs. But the problem is that there's a lot of things that come with that. And we had methamphetamine labs. And rural America, it's just not Southern Europe, rural America is kind of a magnet for those because you have large geographic areas, you have law enforcement that is not maybe as complex, and there's not as many, so people feel a little bit safe in growing their meth labs.
And those are dangerous.
Oh, yeah.
Once a meth lab is a meth lab in a house, it's really dangerous for future homeowners as well, right?
It is dangerous. It has health risks. There's nothing good about that. Nothing good. And it brings, you can actually feel it and see it in your community. We were very successful. As a matter of fact, we were so successful with it, we got recognized by the DEA and asked to go into other rural parts of America to talk about what we did. But we had a very good connection with our businesses. We were a little bit on the edge as far as, searching. I mean, we never went over the line, but we did a lot of things with, for instance, we'd have businesses call us, we'd say, this person came in here and bought this stuff, and then we'd go find the vehicle and stop it. There are those that think, well, that was a little bit strong-handed, but oh my gosh, if you're going to deal with a tiger, you better deal with a tiger. It's not a kitten, right?
Yeah.
And so we were fairly aggressive, I will admit, but we had great success from it.
Okay.
So
let me ask you, did you have to deal with the spring break
Yeah.
crowds, the teenagers that came down?
Listen, I have to.
So how did that work?
Okay, young people today probably don't remember spring break, right? I loved spring break. I mean, we would get 20, 30,000 young people walking up and down our street. It was fabulously entertaining, right?
Yeah.
Of course, there was some bad stuff that came with it, and a lot of people didn't like it but law enforcement, we actually had a pretty good time with it. I remember we had an officer, we had this crowd, and they were over here on 1000 East, and the crowd was it was like a big giant mosh pit. And so I pulled up all important, like what is going on? I look over there, there's one of my officers in there moon dancing with a disguise on, and he's walking backwards, and he's really entertaining. He looks at me, and I look at him, and he goes, oh. And I thought, okay, I'm just gonna walk away. I'm a big bad police officer, but that was funny. And most of the kids that we dealt with just had a wonderful time here, but
Yeah.
it was getting out of hand. We couldn't control it. And then there's always the small element that wants to come in and bully. We had some unfortunate incidents involving some drugs and young women, and if people would come in and enjoy the environment for what it is, it's wonderful. But when we have people coming in and starting to bring weapons and things, it was time for us to take a little stronger approach. And basically, the city worked with the police department and our hotels, and it went away.
Because they required that they had to be adults to
Yes.
rent motel rooms, as I recall.
It was amazing to me, the parents that would say, yeah, it's okay. You can take 6 or 7 of your best friends, and we're going to rent a hotel room for you. We'll see you on Monday. I mean, that'd be wonderful for me as a youth, but it's not very good for large groups of people to have that kind of freedom.
Yeah. So what do you feel were your most important accomplishments
With St. George?
with the St. George Police Department?
I'm very proud of my time there. I think we built a pretty good springboard. I think the chiefs that came after me have done a great job. St. George City is a great police department. Great people, complex mission, can do anything that a major city can do. Well, I consider them a major city for our state. I think they've got wonderful detectives, great programs. I think they're very proactive. Like any law enforcement agency, the public loves you and hates you at the same time. But I think that I feel really good about, we built a springboard for some things, the task force, some of the enforcement things that they still are in place, the motor squad, the care of the community. I mean, our parks are wonderful.
Yes, they are.
Our walkways are wonderful. We have a great demographic here. We have this wonderful university that just brings so much diversity and great stuff to the community. And I think people love being here. because of what we started a long time ago and created a culture of some positive law enforcement. And I'd like to prefer it as public safety, not so much law enforcement, but very proud of where they're at and my contribution many years ago to that.
Okay.
It was a wonderful experience.
So why did you leave the St. George Police Department and accept a position as director of the Utah Public Safety Department in Salt Lake City?
Okay. Well, that's a complex question. That came out of nowhere.
Really?
If you remember, we had the Olympics going on at the time. And I was following the newspapers. I was kind of an interesting cat to them. I was a public safety guy, but I was from the outside too. I was a police chief in St. George, and I got a call once. They were having problems getting people to work together.
In Salt Lake?
In Salt Lake.
For the Olympics?
Well, you had the Olympics, I think when you say the Olympics, folks cannot understand how big that is sometimes. We see the skiers, we see the ice skaters, but the behind the scenes is an enormous effort. And there were some issues involving Utah because we were a small place in this global event, whether we could do it or not, and the getting along, is the FBI in charge, Secret Service in charge, public safety, and all the different venues. We were across multiple counties, and there were some problems getting people to work together. And I got a call I knew Governor Levitt a little bit from his visits down here.
Mike Levitt.
Mike Levitt. I got a call one time that said, Bob Flowers, what would you do if you were in charge of the world?
Oh my gosh.
And I said, oh my gosh.
That's a tough
What a great question. He
question.
goes, what would you do with this and what would you do with that? What would you do with this? I said, well, not being the person that had to do it, I let it out. I said, this is the first thing I do. I would do this and I would do that and I'd do this and I'd do that. I said, this event is too big for ego. You need to get rid of the egos. It's going to be a mess. And so then I said, okay. They said, okay, thank you for the input. Then I get a call about a week later from the governor's chief of staff. And he says, Bob Flowers.
Who was the chief of staff? Do you remember?
Yeah, I'll remember it here in just a minute. But I get a call from the chief of staff, and he says, hey, the governor would like to talk to you again. And I said, okay. And I was in San Diego at the time at the Chiefs Convention. He said, but he wants to talk to you in person. He wants you to get on an airplane and meet him in Las Vegas. And I went, well, okay, my ego was just big enough. I think I'm pretty important, right? Oh, man, the governor's called me and he wants to meet and talk with me. And so I said, okay, I'll get on a plane and I'll go fly. And so it's really a wonderful experience to sit down with just sitting with the governor of the land, truly asking your opinion. It's a unique experience. But when I got there, he says, we've listened to what you said. And I said, okay. I go, what did you think? He goes, yeah. He goes, I want you to do it. And I went, no, there's no way. No way I'm going to catch that check. And I said, no, I'm not your guy. And so, but through some conversation later on, I did not want to leave St. George. It's the best chief's job in the state. I always wanted to live here. My life was on track. My family was doing well. I didn't want to go. And he called me and says, listen, you're going to get a chance to work on the Olympic Games. That's a once in a lifetime opportunity. I promise you will regret it if you don't take this opportunity. So I did.
When did you start?
I started in 2000, a year before the Olympics and about 6 months before 9/11.
Oh my gosh.
And I remember we were going through this Olympic exercise, and it was just kind of business, kind of going about things. It was just so huge. And then we had 9/11 hit, and that changed everything. Everything. It just takes your breath away.
It does.
It takes your breath away. I remember I was teaching a class here at Dixie University here, and I said, well, you guys all remember where you were at 9/11. They're going, well, I wasn't born, Bob. And I'm thinking, oh, wait a minute. That's right. Some of these students don't really remember what that was like. And I remember, to me,
I definitely remember where I was.
Oh, I remember where I was, and I remember being called in and to go directly to the governor's house. And we're all sitting there with blank stares, like, what do we do? And your citizens are looking, what are you going to do? And what does this mean for Utah? And so for a couple of weeks there, we were all trying to figure out. And what's really interesting, I remember the governor saying, everybody relies on the leadership, but what if you're the leader, right? I have to tell you, I think one of the most unappreciated folks during that time was, frankly, our governor at the time. What a magnificent individual when it came to the leadership there. And then I remember talking about whether or not we should even move forward with the Olympic Games and being flown in to have those discussions and, you know, and just being a part of that was the most magnificent part of my career. Just that 6 months to a year watching, you know, when we're in the United States, sometimes it's not popular to talk about patriotism and popular to talk about some of the wonderful things about our country. But when you're going through something like that and you really do come together as a country and decide, okay, we're going to go ahead with this global event, what is it that you need? And I remember going in and talking to Senator Stevens at the time. It was head over the Appropriations Committee, talking about the Olympics and working with, of course, Mitt Romney, of course, was just stellar.
And he was the head of the...
He was the head of the Utah Olympics.
Yes.
And you had people like Fraser Bullock and others, just some of the smartest people you're really ever... It was a treat for me. And then to see some of these wonderful experts come in and talk about security and how do you do security and keep our Constitution in place, and how do you make people feel safe in this when we're all vulnerable, and then you've got this global event. How do you keep it from becoming a security event and not an event about the athletes? And it was marvelous. Absolutely.
It went off really smooth, didn't it?
Oh my gosh.
As far as you were concerned, right?
I'll tell you a funny little story. So did we have threats against the Olympics? Of course you did, right? And we would come in daily and we would check things. And I remember we were in closing ceremonies and I was feeling pretty important and good. I had this great seat and I'm like, you know, nothing has disrupted the games, and we have 10,000 people working on this and feeling pretty good. And all of a sudden the door flies open. This guy goes, "Oh my gosh, we've got an incident." And I'm going, "Oh no, closing ceremonies, really?" He goes, "An individual traveling with the vice president, his photographer, has been lost in an elevator." And I almost busted out laughing.
He's lost
I
in
looked
an
at
elevator.
everybody in the room and I looked at them and I'm going, "That's the emergency. Well, let's go find this individual." We found them. They went into a place they weren't supposed to go, but we got them. We got them to the vehicle and they drove off. And I remember laughing all the way back to the command center thinking, wow.
Oh, yeah.
That was the emergency.
That was the
really.
emergency.
But we had, I remember opening ceremonies and how nervous everybody was. And, you know, we had so many volunteers and how everybody just wanted to do their part. Nobody cared about the other stuff. Amazing experience.
And I'll bet you had a number of agencies that you worked with, right?
Oh my gosh. I can't even begin to tell you how many federal, we had a building with federal agencies on every level, let alone we had 29 counties involved and probably 50 of our cities that were all giving resources. Literally, we had close to 12,000 people involved just security. Wow. But we had the smartest people from the FBI, the smartest people from Secret Service, the smartest people from agencies I never knew existed. I mean, super smart people. That what can we do to help, really? And you know, it was a pleasure working and serving with those people. It was a true honor, something I'll always remember and be grateful for.
Okay.
And so, you know, when you talk about why did it go well, it's because we all came together. Okay. Everybody came together.
So why did you leave the Utah Public Safety Department?
Well, when you're appointed, I was in an appointed position, and those come with terms. And generally the commissioner lasts between 5 and 7 years. And I was coming up on 7.5 years. And when a new governor comes in, they want their own guy. They do. And you know that going in. It's not a lifetime appointment. And I was ready to go. You know, when you're the commissioner of public safety, you have driver's license, you have BCI, you have the crime labs, you have the Aero Bureau, you have the Highway Patrol. You have a diversity, a big organization, and it can be a grind. And so I was feeling like it was time for me to move on, and then I get a call. So if you remember Katrina and all that, in Utah, one of the really great experiences we had, Governor Huntsman, we brought several hundred people to Utah. Just one day I get a call, we're going to have to make room we're going to have to find housing for up to 500 to 600 people that were in Katrina, and we're going to fly them in here and they're going to land. A lot of the people that when they landed didn't even know they were in Utah.
Oh, that's right.
They didn't even know.
And they were coming from like Mississippi and
Yeah, well, they were coming from Louisiana.
Louisiana.
Yeah, and it was really funny because several hours ago they were in water, and some of these folks still had that same clothing on. Man, you could write a book on the stories of these people that landed here, and a lot of folks were African American, and they were kind of concerned. They'd heard the stories, about Utah, and let alone how the environment was. So there was a lot of sensitivity towards that. And so we did that, and we did that wildly successful. General Talbot of the National Guard and just the volunteers. Anyway, we took everybody out to Camp Williams and set them up there. And it was going to be a temporary thing. Well, a lot of folks came here, they didn't really want to leave. It was heartbreaking, some of the stories that we had there. But anyway, so out of that.
Did you say they were taken to Camp Williams?
Yeah, they went to Camp Williams.
Okay.
That's where they landed in Salt Lake Airport, Airport number 2, and then we transported people to Camp Williams and gave them military housing. And then we had to figure out what next. You're going to be here for a couple of weeks. This is meant to be temporary, but you had to get people out of this horrible environment they were in. And so I wrote a paper on that, and we talked about the experiences. And so I got a call. Out of Katrina came this national thought about what's the role of FEMA, and I wrote a paper on it. And
Federal Emergency Management Agency.
Management Agency. The thing about people don't understand about FEMA, they're a finance agency. They're not a rescue agency. They pay for stuff.
Well, that's interesting.
Well, the big thing, where was FEMA, and where was FEMA pays? FEMA is only as good as the local response. And this is kind of controversial, but one of the reasons why some of the things failed in parts of the country is because the local government was overwhelmed, right? A FEMA guy that lands there, he needs a table and a place to write checks. That's all they do. They don't own fire trucks or any of that kind of thing. I think that was kind of a thought that people didn't understand. FEMA pays for things. So they asked me and another guy who were state guys to come into FEMA and maybe give them some thoughts. Well, I had a lot of ideas. They didn't like any of them. And so at that time, there was an election, and they were changing political parties. And I knew, again, as a political appointee, that you just exit your office. They don't have to ask you to leave. You're just done, and you know that. And so I went to FEMA. I was there just a short time. I thought it was going to be longer, but it turned out not to be so. And
you were based in Salt Lake?
No, I lived in Denver at the time.
Oh, you lived in Denver?
I went a lot from Denver to Washington, D.C., but I had the Region 8, which is all the western states, all except California. And so I was moving around a lot. I did a lot with flooding. Fires is big.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, it was, again, a pretty amazing thing.
Yeah.
And when that came over, I was kind of thinking, okay, what do I do now? I'd gone back and got my graduate degree, and I thought, well, I'm going to go work for Dixie State University.
Well, where did you get your graduate degree?
I went to the Naval Postgraduate School in Monterey.
In Monterey, California?
Yeah.
And you got a master's degree in what, law enforcement? Or?
No, it was a brand new degree. Of course, MPS is a military place, and it was a brand new degree. They were talking about it's called. They've changed the name a couple of times, but security studies, and it's about bringing security, federal businesses. Big part of security is, business continuity, and the study of that new area, bringing it all together, and it was being driven by Homeland Security. So I applied, was accepted to the program. There was 13 of us, and we were the very first civilians to graduate from the military school, which was kind of weird because all the military guys looked at us like, what are you guys doing on this campus? Like we were infidels. But we went there, and for a couple of years, we put together some things, and my area was creating trusted intelligence gathering infrastructure within states that you could put your information in and it was safe, and how you use that information. There was one of the criticisms that came out of 9/11 was the stovepiping of information between all agencies. And we had the problem locally, sharing information with the local counties. How does Hurricane and St. George share information on the things and how do you let people into your databases and all that? So it's very complex and hard to do. And there's law that guides some of that.
Right.
So there was some stuff on that. So anyway, I got through the program and thought I would come down here, and then
Okay, so then you accepted a position as police chief with the Santa Clara, was it Santa Clara-Ivins Police Department?
At that time, it was only the Ivins Police
It was just the Ivins Police Department then, okay. And so how did that come about?
Well, that was...
And what is it that appealed to you about that position?
I was...
Was it coming like coming home again?
Yeah, and I was going to retire. I was kind of done with public service, I think. I was really had been my whole professional career, and I was thinking about something different. I got a call that...
a little less stressful, maybe, or not?
That's a really... People think smaller agencies are less stressful. No, they're not.
But
they're more stressful. Everything's personal.
Yeah.
Gosh, it was easier to be Commissioner of Public Safety than it was to be the Chief of Ivins.
Okay.
It really is, because you don't have a staff of 100, right? There's you. You empty your own trash, for heck's sake.
Right.
So I had the opportunity to come down here, and it was mainly about coming to Southern Utah to retire and to live and to do something meaningful. It worked out wonderfully well.
So who interviewed you? Who asked you to come down?
Judy Gubler.
And
if you remember, she was the city manager.
Okay.
It was a little bit like, why do you want to come here? You've got this big thing, da-da-da. I think, you don't get it. I mean, living here is wonderful. And I thought, well, I'm going to come down here and I'm going to do some things, do some personal things, have some fun. And so I came down, and, really, when you live in the community, in a small community, and you work in the law enforcement piece of it, it's not just law enforcement, it's helping people in crises and helping people through tough times. It's very personal. I enjoyed that. And then we combined with Santa Clara because...
How many police officers did you have at the time?
7.
And then when you combined, how many
When we combined, Santa Clara had 6. So we went to 13.
Okay.
And both cities recognized that we couldn't do it alone anymore. It's too complex, too expensive.
So what experiences stand out with your job as Santa Clara Ivins Police Chief? And you're still doing it.
It's the same thing. It's helping people. You get a lot of personal satisfaction out of some major cases where you really can see where you're affecting your community. Santa Clara and Ivins, including St. George, are really safe communities. It has a lot to do with the demographics. When I was teaching over here, we used to talk about the causes of crime. There's the demographic things, there's the economic thing, there's the employment thing. There's just so many variables. Drugs and everything that drugs bring with them. When you live in a small community, you have those same things, right? But it's personal. You can see where you're actually helping people with their families in crisis. You're providing not just the law enforcement aspect of it, but the service to your community.
Okay, so
and that appealed to me.
What have been some of the most challenging aspects of your job as police chief, and how did you respond to that?
I think, of course, I think one of my biggest challenges is keeping the morale high of your police officers.
Say that again?
Keeping the morale high of your police officers, having them still believe in the cause, believe that what you do is important. Don't let what you see in the press go to your value of a person. That's been a real challenge for me. Everything you do you can have a police officer do something somewhere in 20 states over that's really stupid, and then everybody's judging your department on that behavior of that officer. Just the whole evaluation of law enforcement in general, it's really hard on your folks that are doing a really important thing, a really good, meaningful thing.
Okay.
That's been probably one of my biggest challenges.
Okay. You got to work with Ken Campbell, right?
I loved Ken Campbell.
So tell us a little bit about Ken. Because
Ken Campbell was he was the marshal. He had been the sheriff in Washington County, and then he was the marshal in Santa Clara, and wonderful human being. a wonderful human being. Knew everybody in town. He was the guy that would say, come sit in my car and talk to me. I'm not going to write you a citation, but you're going to have to come mow that guy's lawn. You know, it was kind of country law enforcement at its best, but a wonderful gentleman, and left a really great legacy.
Yeah.
I always liked Kenny a lot. We miss him.
Yeah.
We miss him.
Okay. What is there about the job that keeps you going?
I think it's the importance. You know, when you're trying to figure out what you want to do with your life, you got to make sure you find value inside, I think. Law enforcement can do that for you. If you can take out the chatter and really understand the person you're talking to. Most people never run into law enforcement ever. But when they finally call you, it's the worst day in their life. You know, they've had stuff stolen, there's been violence in their family, something awful has happened. You can come and you can make it better for them. May not make it go away, but when you can see that, and you know, I had somebody call me here recently that I dealt with over 18 years ago, and they called me and said, hey, I think about what happened there, just want you to know. But our officers have that kind of stuff happen to them. That's what I like about what we do. And when I tell people in the police academy, it's not about the uniform, the ticket writing, the ego stuff. It's about when people call you, they need something from you. You better be prepared for your job, or you need to find something else.
Okay. What other civic or religious organizations do you participate in, if any? Any other outside interests or hobbies? For hobbies,
well, I used to be very involved in the Chamber of Commerce and some things like that. I'm actually struggling with that a little bit. I've been super involved with retirement associations and things, but as I'm 70 years old now, and you know, when you get to a certain age, your priorities change. I thought I would probably have retired 10 years ago, but what's kept me going is the enjoyment of the job, right? But as far as I want to do some other things.
Okay.
You know.
So where and when were you born?
Wow. You can't ask those questions anymore. You can't ask somebody where. I was born in a place called Hemet, California. We lived in a place called Elsinore.
Okay.
And I was born in 1955.
Okay. Who else was in your family?
I had a brother and two sisters, and I have a sister who lives in Salt Lake, and I have a brother who lives in Oregon, and a sister who lives in Huntington Beach.
Okay. So tell us about your grammar school and your high school years. Anything stand out there?
Wow. I remember in elementary school being hit with a jump rope by a girl because I was flirting with her. I remember that. It's crushed me. I'm still crushed by that. But I remember I grew up in Southern California. When you grew up in the 70s down there, Vietnam War was going on. And I lived near a military base.
What military base?
March Air Force Base.
Okay.
It was, at that time, it was one of the SAC where they were doing a lot of bombing in Vietnam, and they'd fly right out of California. And I remember having friends, you know, when you're a young man and a war's going on, and at that time there was the draft, and you start thinking, man, I'm going to get sent to war. I'm going to Southeast Asia to do something. It frightens you a little bit.
Were you worried that you were going to be drafted?
I wasn't very smart. I was worried about being drafted, but what I didn't know, the draft had ended the year before. But I was not savvy to that. And so I always thought, well, I was not a very good high school student, to be honest with you. I was athletic, but not academic. Didn't put much effort into it. And so when I was getting ready to get out of high school, I knew that I was going to have to do something else. But in my high school, we were consumed a little bit with that. We had, I remember having young men who would come, they would come get them out of school and you'd never see them again. And you'd find out later, years on, that their father was killed in Vietnam or something like that. And some of our guys, when I was just a young freshman in high school, some of our seniors were getting drafted, and they'd come back and visit the school in their uniforms, and that's what that was like.
That's tough.
It was
tough.
Well, you know, I mean, where did you go to school?
Here at Dixie High School.
Yeah.
And yeah, we were on the tail end. You know, we were on the tail end of the Vietnam War.
Yeah.
So we never really had to think of too much. We did have to register for the draft,
Yes,
which I did.
yes.
So, and I'm sure you did as well.
Yeah, I had to register, and I remember we had gas rationing a little bit there at the time. And,
Around 1979?
Yeah, in California at the time, you still were dealing with drought, and then the gas rationing actually started in 1974.
Okay. Yeah, earlier.
Where you could only get gas every other day, and you could only buy so much, and so I kind of giggle sometimes when I hear
know.
that.
So education-wise, did you attend a college or university, and what was your major and minor, if any?
Well, I started at Brigham Young, and I graduated from the University of Utah, and I did attend Weber State a little bit. It was just depending where I was assigned.
And your bachelor's degree was
in political science from the University of Utah.
Did you have a minor?
No.
Okay. Tell me about your college years, if anything stands out.
I was a non-traditional student at the time. I was working full-time, had a young family, so I generally took most of my classes after hours. Occasionally I'd have to attend a class on campus, but I was very non-traditional. To me, going to college was just something I needed to do.
What were you doing job-wise?
I was working as a law enforcement guy.
Oh, okay.
And right. I was working graveyards, going to school during the day, and just had a goal. University I felt at the time was kind of the key to my future. It's a key to, I knew that if you were going to promote, if you're going to do other things, if you want to go on and do some of the things that were required. Like, I really did have intentions of maybe attending law school, but I needed to sharpen up myself academically. And so I took the LSAT twice and did really well the second time. But by then I was far enough in my career, I wasn't going to change.
Okay.
So
describe how you met and married your spouse.
Well, we met, her brother was my friend, and we played a lot of ball together, and I thought his sister was cute, and it was just kind of the traditional kind of thing. And I've got a couple of kids, and they're doing really well. They went to Pineview High School. I've got a son that is right now one of the deputy directors of NCIS, and he worked in counterterrorism for a while. He worked over in Israel. And I got a daughter that's a vice principal in Oklahoma.
In Oklahoma?
Yeah.
Oh,
so
you have any grandchildren?
Yeah, I do. I've got 9.
You got 9 grandchildren?
Yeah. I've got a grandson,
wow, that's awesome.
18 years old.
Okay.
And
so describe any important aspects of family life and raising your children. Anything that stands out there?
Well, like any parent, I wrestled with I think for me, I have wonderful children, add value to my life. There were never any problem to me. We spent a lot of time together, a lot of time. Cut them a lot of slack.
So never a difficulty of balancing your law enforcement career with your family life?
Once or twice, my children would have comments made to them. I remember I was walking down the hallway at Pineview, and I was going to do a presentation, and I was walking with my daughter, and I was walking by this group of kids, and some kid made a pig noise when I walked by, and I stopped, and I called him out. The principal's looking at me, and my son's looking at me. It wasn't difficult. It wasn't difficult. I didn't really have any problems with it.
Okay. So as you look back over your life, what would you like to be remembered for?
I'd like to. I think I want to be remembered. I think by my children as a great guy, good father. As my colleagues, honorable.
Great.
A guy that they enjoyed being around. I don't have any big aspirations there on anything, but just he was good. I enjoyed working with him.
Is there anything else that I haven't asked you that you feel is important to tell?
So when you were a reporter and we worked together, how was that?
I loved working with you. You were always professional, and you were always available. You always made time to be like an interview or whatever.
Yeah.
You were always there, and you always had a positive. You always had a positive presence there with the police department, and it was refreshing, especially under some other circumstances that occurred at the St. George Police Department that I had to cover.
Yeah. Well, you know, I always, as a law enforcement executive, when you're dealing with the press, the truth is the truth. Just give the truth. People will forgive a lot of things, but they will not forgive dishonesty or trying to hide something. Give the truth. If you did something inappropriate or an officer did something inappropriate, just tell people,
Right.
and it'll go away.
I always felt you were very professional and forthcoming and truthful with everything that you did. So, and I appreciated the opportunity that I had to work with you as a reporter for the Spectrum newspaper at the time. So.
Well, you always know a good reporter will find out if you're not telling the truth. You always worried me because you were always very detailed.
That's true, I was.
Yes, you were. Almost annoying so sometimes.
I know, sometimes I was. Well, we want to thank Chief Flowers for taking the time to, from his busy schedule, to work with us and to be here for this oral history interview. And we wish him the best as he continues his duties there.
Thank you.
And in the community. And until next time, I'm Loren Webb. Thank you so much for joining us.